The rise and fall of Pablo Escobar's mansion empire. In the hills above Medellín, Colombia, the ruins of a mansion tell a story that still haunts South America. The walls are scorched black from an explosion that ripped through the building decades ago. Jungle vines crawl through shattered windows. A swimming pool sits empty, filled with debris and rainwater. Graffiti covers surfaces where expensive artwork once hung. This was the Monaco building, the 8-story residential tower that Pablo Escobar built for his family in the most exclusive neighborhood of Medellín. It was designed to project invincibility, bulletproof glass, reinforced concrete, security systems that would have been impressive in a military installation. He believed these walls would protect everything he loved. On January 13, 1988, a car bomb containing 80 kilograms of dynamite detonated outside this building at 5:30 in the morning. The blast killed 2 security guards instantly. It shattered windows for blocks in every direction. Inside, Escobar's daughter Manuela suffered permanent hearing damage. His wife Victoria was thrown across a room. The message from the Cali cartel was clear. No amount of concrete and steel could keep Pablo Escobar's family safe. But the Monaco building was only one property in a vast real estate empire that stretched across Colombia and beyond. At the height of his power, Pablo Escobar owned hundreds of properties, mansions, apartments, ranches, private islands, a 7,000-acre estate with its own zoo, airport, and bull ring. He owned so much land that he could travel from Medellín to the Caribbean coast without ever leaving his own property. This is the story of those properties. The architectural monuments to criminal ambition that rose across Colombia during the 1980s. The hidden rooms and escape tunnels that kept Escobar one step ahead of authorities for years. The ruins that remain today, some preserved as museums, others reclaimed by jungle, all of them testament to a fortune that was once estimated at $30 billion. To understand these buildings, you must first understand the man who built them, and that man emerged from circumstances that made his eventual wealth seem almost impossible. Chapter 1. The boy from Envigado. Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria was born on December 1, 1949, in a small house in Rio Negro, a town in the mountains of Antioquia, Colombia. His father, Abel, was a peasant farmer who worked other people's land. His mother, Hermilda, was a school teacher who struggled to provide for 7 children on a salary that barely covered basic necessities. The family moved to Envigado when Pablo was young, seeking better opportunities in the growing suburbs south of Medellín. Envigado was not a wealthy place. It was a working-class community where families crowded into modest homes and parents worked long hours for little pay. The Escobars were neither the poorest nor the most comfortable. They occupied that uncertain middle ground where survival was assured, but advancement seemed impossible. Pablo showed intelligence early, but little patience for formal education. He was entrepreneurial from childhood, always looking for ways to make money outside conventional channels. Stories from his youth, many of them possibly embellished by Escobar himself in later years, describe a boy who sold contraband cigarettes, rented out stolen bicycles, and engaged in petty schemes that demonstrated creativity, if not ethics. By his teenage years, Escobar had graduated to more serious crime. Car theft became his specialty. He and associates would steal vehicles, alter their identification numbers, and sell them with forged documents. The profit margins were attractive. The risks seemed manageable. The local police could be paid to look elsewhere. This early criminal career taught Escobar lessons he would apply throughout his life. He learned that money could solve most problems. He learned that violence was a useful tool, but that bribery was often more efficient. He learned to cultivate relationships with people at every level of society, from street criminals to local politicians. And he learned that legitimate business provided excellent cover for illegitimate activity. The contraband business expanded. Escobar moved from cars to household appliances to anything that could be smuggled past customs officers who were remarkably easy to corrupt. By his early 20s, he was a known figure in Medellin's underworld, not yet major, but clearly rising. Then a new opportunity arrived that would change everything. The timing was perfect. Colombian traffickers had been moving marijuana to the United States for years, but the profit margins were limited. Marijuana was bulky, difficult to transport in large quantities, and faced competition from domestic American producers. The new product was different. A kilogram purchased for $1,500 in Colombia could sell for $50,000 or more in Miami. The profit potential was extraordinary. Escobar saw the opportunity immediately. He had the smuggling expertise from his contraband operations. He had connections with pilots and transporters. He had relationships with corrupt officials. All he needed was product and a distribution network in the United States. By 1975, Escobar was fully committed to the trade. He partnered with other Medellín traffickers, including the Ochoa brothers and Carlos Leda, to create what would eventually be called the Medellín Cartel. The organization was not a single unified entity, but rather a confederation of independent operators who cooperated on transportation, shared resources, and divided territories. The money came fast. Faster than anyone had anticipated. Faster than Escobar knew how to spend it. He began buying property. Chapter 2. Hacienda Napoles. In 1978, Pablo Escobar purchased a ranch in the Magdalena River Valley, roughly 3 hours east of Medellín. The property covered approximately 7,400 acres of land that stretched from the foothills of the Andes toward the fertile lowlands. It had been a working cattle ranch, modest and unremarkable. Escobar transformed it into something that had never existed in Colombia before. Something that seemed transplanted from the fantasies of a Hollywood producer or the fever dreams of a Roman emperor. He called it Hacienda Napoles, naming it after the Italian city he had visited and admired. The entrance alone announced the scale of ambition. Massive gates opened onto a private road leading into the property. Above the entrance, Escobar mounted a Piper PA-18 Super Cub airplane on concrete pillars. This was allegedly the aircraft used in his first major shipment to the United States, now displayed as a trophy marking the beginning of his empire. The symbolism was unmistakable. Everything that followed had been built on what that small plane had carried. The main house was large, but not exceptionally grand by the standards of wealthy estates. Escobar seemed less interested in architectural elegance than in accumulating attractions. The house served as a base of operations, a place to sleep and conduct business, while the property around it became an ever-expanding collection of diversions. He built a zoo, not a modest collection of local animals, but an ambitious attempt to recreate the world's wildlife on Colombian soil. Elephants were imported from Africa. Giraffes arrived from Kenya. Hippopotamuses were brought from Asia. Zebras, ostriches, exotic birds, big cats, every species that captured Escobar's imagination was purchased and shipped to Hacienda Napoles, regardless of cost or practical consideration. The hippos would prove particularly significant. 4 of them arrived in the early 1980s, 1 male and 3 females. They adapted remarkably well to the Colombian climate, breeding successfully in the warm waters of the property's lakes. Today, decades after Escobar's death, their descendants number over 150, roaming the Magdalena River Valley as an invasive species that no one knows how to control. Beyond the zoo, Escobar built recreational facilities that rivaled any resort. Swimming pools with water slides and diving platforms, tennis courts and soccer fields, a bull ring where professional matadors performed for invited guests, a go-kart track where Escobar himself loved to race, his competitive nature finding outlet in even trivial pursuits. He constructed artificial lakes and stocked them with fish. He built a network of roads that allowed guests to tour the property in jeeps and motorcycles. He installed dinosaur sculptures throughout the grounds, life-sized concrete replicas that gave the estate the feeling of a theme park. An airport capable of handling jet aircraft occupied one corner of the property. Escobar maintained a fleet of planes and helicopters that could transport him anywhere in Colombia within hours. The airport served legitimate purposes, allowing quick travel to business meetings and family events, but it also facilitated the movement of cargo that never appeared on any manifest. The garage housed a collection of automobiles that reflected both wealth and obsession. Vintage cars that Escobar purchased at auction, sports cars imported from Europe, custom vehicles armored against attack. By some estimates, the collection eventually numbered over 100 automobiles. Guest houses scattered across the property could accommodate dozens of visitors simultaneously. Important figures from Medellín society received invitations to weekend parties at Hacienda Napoles. Politicians, businessmen, athletes, entertainers, anyone whose presence might add legitimacy to Escobar's social ambitions. The parties featured elaborate meals, live entertainment, and recreational activities that continued from Friday evening until Sunday afternoon. For visitors from Envigado and the poorer neighborhoods of Medellín, Escobar opened the property on selected weekends. Thousands of ordinary Colombians toured the zoo, rode the attractions, and marveled at what one of their own had accomplished. These public openings served multiple purposes. They reinforced Escobar's image as a man of the people who shared his wealth with his community. They built political support among voters who might otherwise have questioned his methods. And they created a sense of obligation among those who benefited from his generosity. The operational staff required to maintain Hacienda Napoles was substantial. Zookeepers cared for exotic animals that required specialized diets and housing. Groundskeepers maintained the landscaping across thousands of acres. Security personnel monitored the perimeter and screened visitors. Domestic workers kept the main house and guest facilities prepared for use. At its peak, the estate employed hundreds of people whose livelihoods depended entirely on Escobar's continued success. The total cost of creating Hacienda Napoles is impossible to calculate precisely. Estimates range from $20 million to $50 million, figures that meant little to a man whose organization was generating that much revenue every few weeks. Money had become almost abstract for Escobar, a resource so abundant that spending it became challenging. He famously claimed to have spent $2,500 monthly just on rubber bands to bundle cash. He allegedly lost $2.1 billion to rats, water damage, and simple misplacement because he could not store currency fast enough to protect it. Whether these specific numbers are accurate matters less than what they suggest about the scale of wealth that his operations had produced. Hacienda Napoles was not merely a home or even a recreational property. It was a monument, a physical declaration that Pablo Escobar had risen from nothing to possess everything, that a boy from a cramped house in Envigado could build a private kingdom that contained the world in miniature. But even as Escobar completed his rural paradise, he was already expanding into urban real estate that would bring him closer to both political power and mortal danger. Chapter 3. The Monaco Building. By the early 1980s, Pablo Escobar was spending more time in Medellín. His business required constant attention. His political ambitions demanded presence in the city, and his family, particularly his wife Victoria and their two children, Juan Pablo and Manuela, needed a home appropriate to their status. The neighborhood of El Poblado had emerged as the most exclusive district in Medellín. Wealthy industrialists, successful professionals, and old-money families occupied homes along its tree-lined streets. High-rise apartment buildings were beginning to appear, offering security and amenities that traditional houses could not match. Escobar decided to build the most impressive residential tower El Poblado had ever seen. Not simply purchase an apartment in an existing building, but construct something that would announce his arrival among Medellin's elite. The Monaco building would rise 8 stories above the street, containing luxury apartments with floor plans designed to Escobar's personal specifications. Construction began around 1983. The building incorporated security features that reflected Escobar's understanding of his own vulnerability. The structure was reinforced concrete, designed to withstand significant attack. Windows were bulletproof glass. Multiple escape routes allowed rapid evacuation if necessary. A helipad on the roof provided emergency extraction capability. The Escobar family occupied the penthouse. The apartment was decorated with a mixture of expensive furniture and artwork that reflected more money than taste. Valuable paintings shared walls with photographs of the family. Gold fixtures appeared throughout the bathrooms. Every material choice announced wealth, even when the combination produced visual chaos. A garage on the lower level housed part of Escobar's automobile collection, including vehicles that had belonged to famous figures. He allegedly owned a car that had belonged to Al Capone, though the provenance of this claim is uncertain. He collected memorabilia from American gangsters whose careers he admired and apparently sought to emulate. The other apartments in the Monaco building were occupied by family members, trusted associates, and security personnel. The entire structure functioned as a protected compound within the city, a vertical version of the security that Hacienda Napoles provided in the countryside. From the penthouse, Escobar could survey Medellín spreading across the valley below. The city had grown dramatically during his lifetime, its population swelling as rural Colombians migrated in search of opportunity. Some found it. Many did not. The contrast between wealthy neighborhoods like El Poblado and the sprawling slums that climbed the hillsides was visible from any high vantage point. Escobar had emerged from those hillside neighborhoods. He never forgot it, and he used his memory strategically. While living in luxury at the Monaco building, he funded construction projects in poor communities throughout Medellín, housing developments, soccer fields, schools. The neighborhoods he built became known as Barrio Pablo Escobar, and their residents became his most loyal supporters. This dual existence, luxury tower and community benefactor, was central to Escobar's political strategy. In 1982, he was elected as an alternate member of the Colombian Chamber of Representatives, gaining immunity from prosecution and a platform for legitimizing his image. He appeared at official functions, sat in legislative chambers, and enjoyed the pretense of respectability that political office provided. But the Monaco building's security features were not merely paranoid precaution. They reflected a reality that was becoming increasingly dangerous. Escobar had enemies, rival traffickers jealous of his success, Colombian authorities under pressure from the United States to take action. The Cali Cartel, a competing organization that controlled routes through southern Colombia and was expanding aggressively. The American pressure intensified dramatically in 1984. The Colombian government, responding to U.S. demands, began extraditing traffickers to face trial in American courts. For Escobar and his partners, extradition represented an existential threat. Colombian prisons could be controlled through bribery. Colombian judges could be intimidated or purchased. But American courts offered no such options. Conviction in the United States meant decades in maximum security facilities far from any influence the traffickers could exert. Escobar's response to extradition combined political lobbying with terrorism. On one hand, he funded campaigns against extradition, arguing that it violated Colombian sovereignty. On the other, he ordered assassinations of officials who supported the policy, cabinet ministers, judges, journalists. Anyone who advocated for extradition became a target. The violence escalated throughout the late 1980s. Newspaper editor Guillermo Cano was murdered. Justice Minister Rodrigo Lara Bonilla was assassinated. Presidential candidate Luis Carlos Galán was shot to death at a campaign rally. An Avianca commercial flight was bombed, killing 110 people in an attempt to eliminate another candidate who survived only because he was not on the plane. In this context, the attack on the Monaco building in January 1988 represented just one episode in an ongoing war. The Cali cartel had decided that if they could not defeat Escobar directly, they would make him feel personally vulnerable. The bomb that destroyed part of his family home achieved that goal. Escobar responded with characteristic fury, launching attacks against Cali cartel properties and personnel. But the damage to the Monaco building could not be undone. His family would never feel safe there again. The symbol of his urban success had become a symbol of his vulnerability. Today, the Monaco building still stands in El Poblado, though not for much longer. The Colombian government has announced plans to demolish the structure and replace it with a memorial park honoring the victims of the violence. The building itself has become contested territory, with some arguing it should be preserved as a historical site and others insisting it represents only pain that should be erased. Until demolition occurs, the Monaco building remains a tourist attraction. Visitors photograph the bomb-scarred facade. They pose in front of the garage where Escobar's cars once sat. They try to imagine what life was like in the penthouse where Colombia's most wanted man ate dinner with his children while his organization operated across the world. Chapter 4. The Apartments of Medellín. The Monaco building was the crown jewel of Escobar's urban real estate, but it was far from his only property in Medellín. Throughout the 1980s, he accumulated apartments, houses, and commercial buildings across the city, creating a portfolio that served multiple purposes. Some properties provided residences for family members. Escobar's extended family, including parents, siblings, and more distant relatives, received homes purchased with cartel money. These gifts cemented loyalty and distributed wealth in ways that reduced the concentration of assets under any single name. Other properties housed members of his organization. The Medellín cartel employed thousands of people at various levels, from street-level operatives to transportation coordinators to security personnel. Key figures needed safe places to live, and Escobar provided them. The apartments created networks of mutual obligation. Those who accepted his generosity became invested in his continued success. Safe houses formed another category entirely. Escobar maintained dozens of locations throughout Medellín where he could hide if necessary. These ranged from modest apartments in working-class neighborhoods to comfortable homes in areas no one would associate with a trafficker. Each safe house was known to only a handful of trusted individuals. Each was equipped with basic necessities and communication equipment that would allow Escobar to continue directing operations while remaining invisible. The safe house strategy reflected lessons Escobar had learned from observing failed criminals. Many were captured because they followed predictable patterns, sleeping in the same location, eating at the same restaurants, traveling the same routes. Escobar deliberately randomized his movements. He might spend one night at Hacienda Napoles, the next in an apartment his enemies did not know existed, the third at a location he had never used before. This unpredictability made him extraordinarily difficult to locate. Colombian authorities would receive intelligence about his whereabouts only to arrive at locations he had vacated hours earlier. The network of properties gave him options that more conventional targets did not possess. Commercial real estate provided additional cover. Escobar invested in legitimate businesses throughout Medellín, including taxi companies, construction firms, and retail operations. Some of these businesses were genuinely profitable. Others existed primarily to launder proceeds, creating paper trails that converted obviously illegal cash into apparently legitimate income. The real estate holdings also served as a form of banking. In an era before sophisticated financial technology made international money laundering easier, physical property provided a relatively safe store of value. Properties could be purchased with cash, held indefinitely, and sold when liquid funds were needed. The Colombian real estate market was not particularly transparent, and government oversight was minimal. Escobar could acquire buildings without attracting the attention that large bank deposits would have generated. His purchasing methods were often unconventional. Sometimes he would approach property owners with offers well above market value, making refusal difficult. Other times, the offers were accompanied by threats that made refusal dangerous. The phrase plata o plomo, silver or lead, became associated with Escobar's negotiating style. You could accept his money or accept his bullets. Most chose the money. By the mid-1980s, Escobar's real estate holdings in Medellín alone were valued in the hundreds of millions of dollars. The exact total is unknown because many properties were registered under false names or held through corporate structures designed to obscure ownership. But the scale was evident to anyone paying attention. Pablo Escobar owned a significant percentage of one of Colombia's largest cities. Chapter 5. The Rural Empire. While the Monaco building and urban apartments provided bases for operations and family life, Escobar's most extensive holdings were rural. The Colombian countryside offered advantages that cities could not match: privacy, space for facilities and storage, proximity to transportation routes, and distance from the authorities concentrated in urban areas. Hacienda Napoles was the largest and most famous of these properties, but it was far from the only one. Escobar accumulated ranches and farms throughout Antioquia, Córdoba, and other departments, building a territorial footprint that would have been impressive for a legitimate agricultural enterprise. Some properties focused on cattle ranching, a traditional and respected occupation in Colombian rural culture. These ranches provided legitimate income that could be declared on tax returns. They employed local workers who became advocates for Escobar in their communities. They produced beef that was sold through normal commercial channels, generating cash flows that appeared entirely legal. Other properties served more specific purposes in the operation. Processing facilities required isolated locations with reliable water supplies and protection from aerial surveillance. Escobar established such facilities on rural properties throughout his territory, moving operations regularly to avoid detection and keeping each site small enough that its loss would not significantly impact overall production. Storage facilities were equally important. At its peak, the Medellín cartel was moving enormous volumes of product annually. This required staging areas where shipments could be accumulated before transport, held during price negotiations, or hidden during periods of increased enforcement pressure. Rural properties provided ideal storage locations, far from the routine police activity of urban areas. Airstrips appeared on many of Escobar's rural holdings. Colombia's geography, with its dense jungles, mountain ranges, and limited road infrastructure, made air transportation essential for efficient operations. Small aircraft could move cargo from processing regions to departure points near the Caribbean coast. They could insert operatives into remote areas. They could evacuate personnel when ground routes became compromised. The ranches near the Caribbean coast were particularly strategic. Properties in Córdoba department provided access to the Gulf of Urabá and the Caribbean Sea beyond. From these locations, speedboats and aircraft could reach Central America, the Caribbean islands, and eventually the United States. The proximity to international waters reduced the time during which shipments were vulnerable to Colombian interdiction. Escobar also acquired properties along the rivers that formed Colombia's natural transportation network. The Magdalena River system connected the interior highlands to the Caribbean coast. Properties along these waterways facilitated movement of both legal goods and contraband. A ranch on the river might appear to ship cattle while actually moving hidden cargo among legitimate shipments. The labor requirements for these rural properties were substantial. Cowboys worked the cattle operations. Farmers maintained the appearance of agricultural production. Security personnel protected high-value facilities. Workers operated the processing sites under conditions that were often dangerous and always illegal. The total employment across Escobar's rural holdings numbered in the thousands. Many of these workers were drawn from communities where legitimate employment opportunities were scarce. Escobar paid well, and his reputation for taking care of loyal employees attracted applicants despite the obvious risks. A job on one of his ranches might be illegal, but it provided reliable income in regions where reliable income was rare. Chapter 6. Beyond Colombia. Pablo Escobar's real estate ambitions extended beyond Colombian borders. As his wealth grew and his domestic situation became increasingly complicated, he sought properties in other countries that might provide refuge if Colombia became too dangerous. The Bahamas attracted his attention early. The island nation's proximity to Florida made it strategically valuable for operations. Its banking system offered confidentiality that facilitated money movement. Its real estate market welcomed cash buyers who did not ask many questions. Escobar reportedly purchased a private island in the Bahamas during the early 1980s. The property included a luxury residence, boat docks, and infrastructure for hosting guests who preferred to remain distant from public attention. The island served as both a vacation retreat and an operational waypoint for shipments moving toward the American coast. Norman's Cay, an island in the Exumas chain, became particularly associated with Medellín cartel operations. While the property was primarily controlled by Escobar's partner Carlos Leda rather than Escobar himself, it demonstrated the model that Colombian traffickers employed. Purchase an isolated property. Establish transportation facilities. Use the location as a staging point for moving product into the United States. The Norman's Cay operation was eventually disrupted by American pressure on the Bahamian government, but it illustrated what was possible when cartel money met Caribbean real estate. Panama offered another jurisdiction where Escobar reportedly held properties. General Manuel Noriega, the Panamanian dictator, had extensive relationships with Colombian traffickers throughout the 1980s. His country provided banking services, transportation routes, and safe harbor for individuals fleeing Colombian authorities. Whether Escobar personally owned Panamanian real estate or simply had access to properties controlled by associates remains unclear, but Panama certainly served as part of his operational infrastructure. Nicaragua, under the Sandinista government, allegedly provided similar services. The politically isolated regime needed revenue that trafficking could provide. Traffickers needed territory outside the reach of American and Colombian law enforcement. The mutual interests created relationships that reportedly included use of Nicaraguan territory for transshipment operations. Mexico was increasingly important as Caribbean routes came under pressure. The Colombian cartels began partnering with Mexican traffickers who controlled smuggling infrastructure along the U.S. border. These relationships would eventually shift the balance of power in the trade, making Mexican organizations dominant and Colombian groups subordinate. But in the 1980s, the Colombians still held the superior position, and their Mexican partners provided access to properties and routes that extended the reach of organizations like the Medellín cartel. Within the United States itself, Escobar's organization controlled properties that facilitated distribution operations. Safe houses in Miami, New York, Los Angeles, and other major cities provided locations for receiving shipments, storing inventory, and conducting transactions. These properties were typically modest, designed to avoid attention rather than display wealth. They were rented or purchased through intermediaries whose connections to Colombian traffickers were not immediately obvious. The international real estate portfolio served several strategic purposes. It diversified Escobar's assets across multiple jurisdictions, reducing the risk that any single government could seize everything. It provided escape options if Colombia became untenable. It facilitated operations at every stage of the chain, from production through transportation to final distribution. But the foreign properties also created vulnerabilities. Assets in other countries were harder to protect than those in Colombia, where Escobar's political and criminal networks provided layers of security. When American pressure increased and foreign governments found cooperation more attractive than the bribes traffickers could offer, these properties became targets. Chapter 7. La Catedral. By 1991, Pablo Escobar faced pressures from every direction. The Colombian government, under President Cesar Gaviria, was conducting military operations specifically targeting the Medellín cartel leadership. The Cali cartel was attacking his organization and his family. The United States was providing intelligence, equipment, and training to Colombian forces, while maintaining its own operations in the region. A vigilante group called Los Pepes, apparently composed of his enemies with government support, was systematically murdering his associates and destroying his properties. The situation required a creative solution. Escobar could not continue operating openly. He could not flee the country without abandoning the organization that was his source of power. He could not trust the Colombian justice system to treat him fairly. And he could not survive indefinitely against the coalition of enemies arrayed against him. His answer was to negotiate a surrender on terms that no ordinary criminal could have imagined. The Colombian constitution had recently been amended to prohibit extradition, removing the threat that had motivated much of Escobar's terrorism. He proposed to submit to Colombian justice, accepting imprisonment in exchange for safety from his enemies. But he had conditions. The prison would be built to his specifications. It would be located in Envigado, his home territory, where local loyalties would provide an additional layer of security. It would be staffed by guards of his choosing. And it would be comfortable enough that imprisonment would not significantly disrupt his lifestyle. The Colombian government, exhausted by years of violence and desperate for any resolution that might reduce the killing, agreed. Construction began on a facility officially called the Cathedral, but quickly nicknamed La Catedral. The site Escobar selected was a hillside above Envigado, approximately 6,500 feet above sea level. The location provided natural defensive advantages. Any approach was visible from above. The mountain roads could be easily controlled. The altitude meant cooler temperatures than the valley floor, a comfort Escobar appreciated. What emerged was unlike any prison that had existed before. The facility covered approximately 30,000 square feet of construction plus extensive grounds. The main building contained comfortable bedrooms rather than cells. Each room had a private bathroom. Windows offered views of the valley below rather than staring at concrete walls. Common areas included a bar, a disco, and spaces for parties that became regular occurrences. A full-size soccer field allowed Escobar and his fellow inmates to play their favorite sport. A gym equipped with exercise machines kept them physically fit. The kitchen served meals prepared according to inmates' preferences, rather than institutional menus. The telecommunications infrastructure was particularly notable. Escobar maintained telephone lines, fax machines, and radio equipment that allowed him to continue directing cartel operations from within the prison walls. Business meetings occurred regularly, with associates traveling to La Catedral to receive instructions and report on activities. The guards, carefully selected for their loyalty to Escobar, facilitated rather than prevented these contacts. Women were regular visitors. Not merely family members during official visiting hours, but girlfriends and others who arrived for extended stays. The parties at La Catedral became legendary, featuring alcohol, music, and entertainments that would have been impossible in any legitimate correctional facility. The physical security, such as it was, pointed outward rather than inward. The fence, the guards, the surveillance systems were all designed to protect Escobar from his enemies rather than to prevent his escape. He could leave whenever he wished. Several sources report that he did exactly that on numerous occasions, traveling to Medellín for business or pleasure before returning to the safety of his hilltop compound. For approximately a year, this arrangement persisted. Escobar enjoyed comfortable confinement while maintaining his business operations. The Colombian government claimed credit for imprisoning the world's most wanted trafficker. The violence decreased somewhat as Escobar's enemies waited to see how the situation would develop. The arrangement collapsed in July 1992. Reports emerged that Escobar had ordered the murder of 2 associates whom he suspected of stealing from him. The killings occurred inside La Catedral itself, making it impossible for the government to maintain the fiction that the facility was a functioning prison. President Gaviria ordered Escobar transferred to a conventional prison. Military forces moved toward La Catedral, but Escobar had anticipated this possibility. He escaped from the prison he had built for himself, disappearing into the Colombian countryside with a network of safe houses waiting to receive him. La Catedral was abandoned. The government eventually demolished parts of the structure, though significant portions remain. Today, the site is partially occupied by a monastery, with monks living in buildings that once housed traffickers. Visitors can still see remnants of the facility, including the soccer field and some of the original construction. The escape from La Catedral began the final chapter of Escobar's life. He would spend the next 17 months as a fugitive, hunted by Colombian forces, American intelligence, and the vigilante groups that targeted his organization. His real estate empire began to collapse as properties were seized, destroyed, or abandoned. The infrastructure that had supported his power was systematically dismantled. Chapter 8. The Hunt. The escape from La Catedral in July 1992 transformed Pablo Escobar's relationship with his properties. What had been sources of power became vulnerabilities. Every known location was a potential trap. Every safe house was only safe until enemies discovered its existence. The real estate empire that had demonstrated his dominance now demonstrated his exposure. Colombian authorities established a special unit called the Search Block specifically to locate and capture Escobar. American intelligence agencies provided surveillance technology, communications intercepts, and analytical support. The organization Los Pepes, widely believed to operate with government tolerance if not active support, targeted Escobar's associates and properties with brutal effectiveness. The systematic destruction of his holdings began immediately. Properties associated with Escobar were raided, searched, and often burned. Safe houses were identified through captured associates who revealed their locations under interrogation. Processing facilities were discovered and demolished. Ranches were seized and their assets confiscated. Hacienda Napoles was particularly targeted. Government forces occupied the property, using it as a base for operations against remaining cartel elements. The exotic animals that had been Escobar's prized collection scattered or died as care became impossible to maintain. The attractions that had drawn thousands of visitors fell into disrepair. The Monaco building in Medellín, already damaged by the 1988 bombing, was repeatedly raided as authorities searched for intelligence about Escobar's whereabouts and operations. His family had long since abandoned the penthouse, but the building's other units had housed associates whose documents and communications might provide useful information. Escobar's response to this pressure demonstrated both his resources and his desperation. He moved constantly, rarely spending more than a few nights in any single location. The network of safe houses he had established over years of careful planning now became essential to his survival. But the network was finite, and each captured associate potentially compromised additional locations. He continued operating his business, even while fleeing. The trade did not stop because its leader was hunted. Shipments continued to move. Money continued to flow. Escobar issued orders through trusted intermediaries, maintaining control of his organization despite his personal vulnerability. But the pressure was unsustainable. Los Pepes murdered his associates at a terrifying rate, sometimes several per week. Lawyers, accountants, family members of cartel figures, anyone connected to Escobar became a potential target. The message was clear. Association with Pablo Escobar had become a death sentence. Properties that had been acquired to demonstrate success became liabilities to be abandoned. Escobar could not protect his holdings while protecting himself. He retreated into an ever smaller circle of trusted locations, his empire contracting around him. The communications technology that had allowed him to manage a multinational criminal enterprise now threatened his survival. American surveillance could track radio transmissions. Telephone calls could be intercepted and traced. The sophisticated infrastructure that had made him powerful now made him findable. His final hiding place was a modest house in the Los Olivos neighborhood of Medellín. It was nothing like the Monaco building or Hacienda Napoles. Just an ordinary middle-class residence, notable only for its obscurity. Escobar apparently believed he could hide indefinitely in such an unremarkable location, surrounded by neighbors who had no idea who lived among them. He was wrong. On December 2nd, 1993, the day after his 44th birthday, Colombian security forces located Escobar through a traced telephone call. He had been speaking with his son, unable to resist contact with his family despite the risks. The search block moved quickly, surrounding the house and preparing an assault. Escobar and his bodyguard attempted to escape across the rooftops. Gunfire erupted. Within minutes, both men were dead. Photographs show Escobar's body on a rooftop, blood visible on his face. His life ended in a setting that bore no resemblance to the palaces he had built. The death of Pablo Escobar effectively ended the Medellín cartel as a major organization. Associates were already dead, imprisoned, or in hiding. The infrastructure had been largely destroyed. The political protection that corruption had purchased had evaporated. What remained would be absorbed by other organizations or simply disappear. But the properties remained. The physical legacy of Escobar's empire would prove more durable than his organization. Chapter 9. The Ruins. In the years following Escobar's death, his properties entered various states of decay, seizure, and transformation. The fate of each location reflected Colombia's complicated relationship with the trafficker who had been simultaneously its most wanted criminal and one of its most famous figures. Hacienda Napoles was seized by the Colombian government as an asset of the criminal organization. For years, the property sat largely abandoned. The buildings deteriorated without maintenance. The attractions fell into disrepair. The zoo animals either died or were relocated to facilities capable of caring for them. The hippos proved impossible to relocate. The massive animals had thrived in the warm waters of the property's lakes, breeding successfully and establishing a population that grew with each passing year. Attempts to capture or kill them generated public opposition. The hippos had become celebrities in their own right, associated with Escobar's memory, but innocent of any crime themselves. In 2007, a thematic park opened at Hacienda Napoles, attempting to transform the notorious property into a family tourism destination. The park features water attractions, a hotel, and educational exhibits about African wildlife. The association with Escobar is unavoidable but downplayed. The goal is apparently to extract economic value from the property's fame while distancing it from glorification of criminal activity. The original structures of Escobar's compound still exist within the park, though in deteriorated condition. The main house is a shell. The dinosaur sculptures stand weathered and crumbling. The gate with the airplane mounted above it remains, though the aircraft itself shows the effects of decades of tropical exposure. Visitors can walk through ruins that once hosted parties attended by politicians and beauty queens. The Monaco building in Medellín still stands as of this writing, though its demolition is imminent. The Colombian government announced plans to destroy the structure and replace it with a memorial park. The process has been delayed by legal challenges and logistical complications, but the building's eventual fate seems certain. In the meantime, tourists continue to visit, Guided tours describe the building's history, the bomb attack, the artifacts that Escobar collected. The structure has become a stop on what might be called narco-tourism, the growing industry of visits to sites associated with Colombia's trafficking history. La Catedral, the prison that Escobar built for himself, is partially occupied by a religious order. Benedictine monks live in buildings that once housed traffickers. They have attempted to transform the site's meaning from monument to criminality to place of contemplation and redemption. The soccer field where Escobar played with his associates is still visible, though transformed by time and different purpose. Other properties have met various fates. Some were seized and auctioned by the government. Others were destroyed deliberately to eliminate physical reminders of the traffickers' presence. Still others were sold by family members who retained ownership through legal technicalities, generating controversy about whether Escobar's heirs should profit from assets accumulated through murder and illegal operations. The total value of Escobar's real estate holdings at the time of his death is impossible to calculate precisely. Government seizures accounted for properties worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Hidden assets that were never discovered may still exist, their locations known only to associates who have died or chosen to remain silent. Some have speculated that buried cash remains undiscovered on rural properties, though decades of searching by treasure hunters and authorities alike have produced little evidence. Chapter 10. The Hippo Problem. Of all the legacies Pablo Escobar left at Hacienda Napoles, the most unexpected has been the hippopotamuses. What began as 4 animals imported for a private zoo has become an ecological crisis that no one knows how to resolve. The hippos adapted remarkably well to Colombian conditions. The warm climate was similar to their native Africa. The rivers and lakes provided abundant habitat. Natural predators did not exist. And when Escobar's estate was abandoned, the hippos simply left, wandering into the surrounding countryside and establishing themselves in the Magdalena River watershed. By 2020, the population was estimated at 80 to 100 animals. Current estimates suggest the number may exceed 150 and could reach several thousand within the next few decades if no intervention occurs. The hippos have spread across a territory spanning hundreds of square miles, appearing in rivers, streams, and lakes throughout the region. The ecological impact is significant. Hippos are not native to South America and have no natural place in the ecosystem they now occupy. Their waste changes the chemical composition of waterways. Their grazing affects vegetation patterns. Their presence displaces native species that cannot compete with animals weighing up to 3,000 pounds. The human impact is equally concerning. Hippos are among the most dangerous animals in Africa, responsible for more human deaths than lions, leopards, and crocodiles combined. They are territorial and aggressive. Colombian communities along the rivers where hippos now live face risks that did not exist before Escobar decided to build a private zoo. Attempted solutions have generated controversy. Proposals to cull the population through hunting or poisoning have faced fierce public opposition. The hippos have become beloved figures despite their danger, associated with a romanticized memory of Escobar that many Colombians hold despite his crimes. Killing them feels, to many, like destroying a part of Colombian heritage. Sterilization programs have been attempted but face enormous practical challenges. Capturing hippos is dangerous and expensive. Sterilizing them requires specialized veterinary skills. And the number of animals already in the population means that even successful sterilization of many individuals may not prevent continued growth. The Colombian government has declared the hippos an invasive species and authorized efforts to control their population, but the resources devoted to the problem remain insufficient given the scale. The hippos continue to breed. The population continues to grow. The territory they occupy continues to expand. Some scientists have proposed that the hippos may actually be filling an ecological niche that has been empty since megafauna went extinct in South America thousands of years ago. Under this view, the hippos are not invaders, but replacements, performing functions that giant animals once performed before humans hunted them to extinction. The argument is controversial, but it illustrates the complexity of the situation. Pablo Escobar wanted to possess the world in miniature at Hacienda Napoles. Decades after his death, a small piece of that world is possessing Colombia. The hippos may outlast every other physical remnant of his empire, a living legacy that reproduces and spreads while buildings crumble and memories fade. Chapter 11. The tourism industry. Pablo Escobar has become a tourist attraction. This fact disturbs many Colombians, particularly those who remember the violence of the 1980s and 1990s. Thousands of people died because of Escobar's orders. Entire families were destroyed. The country was traumatized in ways that still affect national psychology. The idea that foreigners now travel to Colombia specifically to visit sites associated with his life feels, to many, like a profound insult, but the tourism exists, and it has become an industry. Tour operators in Medellín offer packages that visit the Monaco building, Escobar's grave, neighborhoods where he operated, and locations associated with key events in his life. Some tours are led by former associates or family members who monetize their proximity to the trafficker. Hacienda Napoles receives thousands of visitors annually. Most come for the water park and family attractions, but the association with Escobar is inseparable from the property's identity. Visitors photograph the gate with the airplane. They explore the ruins of his compound. They post images on social media with captions that range from educational to glorifying. Netflix's series Narcos, which dramatized Escobar's life and death, dramatically increased international interest in the physical locations of his story. Viewers who watched Brazilian actor Wagner Moura portray Escobar now wanted to see where the real events occurred. Tour operators reported substantial increases in bookings following the show's release. The tourism raises difficult questions about memory, profit, and responsibility. Should Colombia preserve sites associated with Escobar as historical landmarks, or should they be destroyed to avoid glorifying his crimes? Who should profit from tourism to these locations? Is there an ethical way to visit places associated with a man responsible for so much death? Escobar's family has been particularly controversial in this regard. His son, who now goes by the name Sebastian Marroquin, has built a career as a speaker and author, telling his father's story while advocating against violence. His daughter Manuela has remained largely private. His widow Victoria has attempted to stay out of public view. Various extended family members have given interviews, written books, and participated in tours, generating both income and criticism. Some tour operators attempt to provide educational context, explaining the violence and suffering that Escobar caused alongside the dramatic narrative of his rise and fall. Others seem more interested in sensationalism, treating Escobar as a fascinating outlaw figure rather than a mass murderer. The distinction matters, though visitors may not always recognize it. The Colombian government's position has evolved over time. Initial impulses to erase all physical evidence of Escobar's existence have given way to more nuanced approaches. The announced demolition of the Monaco building will be accompanied by construction of a memorial to victims, an attempt to transform a site of criminal pride into a site of collective mourning. The debate over narco-tourism reflects broader questions about how societies should remember their darkest periods. Germany preserves concentration camps as educational sites while prohibiting Nazi glorification. The United States maintains plantations where slavery occurred while attempting to tell more complete stories about the people who were enslaved there. Colombia is navigating similar territory, trying to find ways to acknowledge history without celebrating the criminals who made it. Chapter 12. What Remains? 3 decades after Pablo Escobar's death, his real estate empire exists in fragments. Some properties have been completely destroyed, others have been transformed beyond recognition. A few remain substantially as he left them, deteriorating but still recognizable as monuments to his ambition. Hacienda Napoles is the largest and most accessible remnant. The theme park that now occupies the property generates tourist revenue while maintaining an uneasy relationship with the estate's history. The original structures decay while new attractions are built around them. The Hippos continue their expansion through the surrounding watershed. The Monaco building awaits demolition, its bomb-scarred facade still visible from the streets of El Poblado. When it finally comes down, one of the most recognizable symbols of Escobar's urban presence will be gone. The memorial that replaces it will tell a different story than the building itself has told for decades. La Catedral exists in partial form, with monks occupying buildings that once housed traffickers. The site offers a kind of redemption narrative, suggesting that even places associated with great evil can be transformed into something different. Whether this transformation erases history or simply adds new layers to it remains a matter of perspective. Scattered across Colombia, properties that once belonged to Escobar have been absorbed into the normal real estate market. Houses where he slept, apartments where his associates lived, commercial buildings that housed his operations, many of these have been sold and resold until their connection to the trafficker has been forgotten by everyone except historians. The money itself is gone, or at least not available to his family. Colombian authorities seized what they could identify. American sanctions froze international assets. The fortune that was once estimated at $30 billion largely evaporated through confiscation, destruction, and the simple chaos that followed the organization's collapse. What remains is the memory, the story that continues to fascinate people around the world. The legend of a poor boy who built an empire, challenged a government, and died on a rooftop in the city where he was born. The properties were physical manifestations of that story, and even as they crumble and disappear, the narrative they represented persists. Escobar's legacy in Colombian architecture is not limited to his personal properties. The construction projects he funded in poor neighborhoods still house families. The soccer fields he built are still in use. The buildings that went up with cartel money became part of Medellin's permanent infrastructure, indistinguishable from buildings funded through legitimate means. The city itself bears his mark in less tangible ways. The wealth that trafficking brought to Medellín funded development that shaped its growth patterns. The violence that the trade caused forced adaptations in urban design, security measures, and social organization. The corruption that Escobar's money purchased affected institutions in ways that persist decades after his death. Young Colombians who were born after Escobar died have a different relationship with his memory than those who lived through the terror. For them, he is a historical figure, fascinating and distant, rather than a personal threat. Some romanticize him as a folk hero who defied authority and shared his wealth with the poor. Others see him more clearly as a murderer who destroyed thousands of lives for personal profit. The real estate empire speaks to both interpretations. It demonstrates extraordinary ambition and capability. Building what Escobar built required vision, organization, and resources that few people possess. The scale of his construction projects commands a certain respect even from those who despise everything he represented. But the ruins also demonstrate the ultimate failure of his project. The mansion empire crumbled. The organization collapsed. The fortune disappeared. The man who thought he could build something permanent left behind only fragments that the jungle is slowly reclaiming. Chapter 13. The Lessons of the Ruins. The ruins of Pablo Escobar's mansion empire teach something important about the nature of power built on violence and crime. No matter how impressive it appears, no matter how permanent it seems at its moment of greatest glory, it eventually collapses. Escobar built more than any Colombian trafficker before or since. His properties stretched from the mountains to the coast. His wealth at its peak rivaled that of legitimate billionaires. His political influence reached into the highest levels of government. He seemed, for a moment, to have constructed something that would endure. But the foundation was rotten. An empire built on murder cannot maintain the relationships necessary for long-term survival. The fear that keeps subordinates loyal also makes them potential betrayers when circumstances change. The corruption that protects criminal enterprise also hollows out the institutions that provide stability. The violence that eliminates enemies also creates new enemies with nothing left to lose. Escobar's properties were symptoms of a deeper dysfunction. The Monaco building, with its bulletproof glass and escape routes, demonstrated that its owner could never truly feel safe. Hacienda Napoles, with its walls and security systems, showed that even in his private paradise, threats were never far from mind. La Catedral, the prison he built for himself, revealed that even his attempts at resolution were fundamentally unstable. The Colombian state, for all its weaknesses and corruption, eventually proved stronger than Escobar's organization. International pressure provided resources and determination that domestic politics alone might not have generated. The accumulation of enemies, from rival cartels to vigilante groups to families of victims, created coalitions that no amount of money could buy off. Today, trafficking continues in Colombia and throughout the world. New organizations have risen to replace the Medellín cartel. New fortunes have been accumulated, new properties have been built. The business model that Escobar pioneered persists, adapted to new circumstances but fundamentally similar in its reliance on violence, corruption, and enormous profits from prohibited substances. But no subsequent trafficker has achieved Escobar's level of public prominence or personal notoriety. The lesson of his fate has been absorbed by those who followed. Keep a lower profile. Avoid direct confrontation with governments. Build quietly rather than ostentatiously. The days of traffickers constructing visible empires may be over, replaced by more subtle accumulation that attracts less attention. The properties that Escobar built remain as warnings. This is what happens when someone attempts to stand above the law through sheer force of money and violence. For a time, it works. The mansions rise. The zoo fills with exotic animals. The parties attract beautiful people and important guests. And then it ends, usually suddenly, usually violently, and the jungle begins reclaiming what briefly seemed like permanent achievement. Visitors who walk through the ruins of Hacienda Napoles today can feel this lesson in the crumbling concrete and the overgrown gardens. The swimming pools are empty. The dinosaur sculptures are weathered and broken. The main house is a shell. Everything that Pablo Escobar built is being erased by time and nature and deliberate destruction. What remains are stories, memories, legends that grow more distorted with each retelling. And the hippos, still breeding in the rivers of the Magdalena Valley, the strangest and most durable monument to a man who thought he could possess the world. This is the story of Pablo Escobar's mansion empire. The properties that rose across Colombia during the 1980s, the hidden rooms and escape tunnels, the prison that was no prison at all. The ruins that remain today, teaching their silent lessons to anyone willing to learn. It is a story of ambition and violence, of wealth beyond imagination and destruction beyond measure. It is a story that Colombia is still trying to understand, still trying to process, still trying to decide how to remember. The mansions are mostly gone now. The fortune has dispersed. The organization has dissolved, but the questions that Escobar's life raised persist. How could one man build so much? How could a society allow it to happen? And what does it mean that people still come from all over the world to stand in the ruins and try to understand? The answers are not simple. The lessons are not easy. But the ruins are there for anyone who wants to see them, monuments to power that was never as permanent as it appeared, and to the violence that always, eventually, consumes itself.